in pursuit of education. Horace Mann, a pioneer of public schools in the 19th century America, famously said that education is the great equalizer of the conditions of men, the balance wheel of the social machinery. However, vice versa is also true. Education is a critical societal and communal element that requires considerable public sector funding at all levels of governance. Mann asserted that education is the backbone of democracy and that it should be universal, non-sectarian, free, and its aims should be social efficiency, civic virtue and character, rather than mere learning or the advancement of sectarian ends. The main purpose of a robust education system is to build, strengthen and sustain society, freedom, and democracy. Unfortunately, with the growing academic peer pressures, ever-escalating tuition fee and mounting student debts, the global economic competitiveness, as education's most widely proclaimed goals, seems to be in jeopardy. Universal public education was established for the benefits it provides to the common good, and thus, education is neither a private good nor a market commodity. Great progress has been made in establishing a universal public education system in Canada, as also depicted by the highest graduation rates worldwide. More than half of the Canadian adult population, people between the ages of 25 and 64, have completed certain degree of tertiary education in the form of a 2-year degree, 4-year degree, or vocational program/training. Thus, making Canada one of the most educated country in the world. Yet, substantial socioeconomic disparities in educational attainment and resource allocation persist that undermine potential opportunities, capabilities, and freedoms, further continuing to plague social equality and equity with ripple effects on health. The learning gap, pitfalls in the education system. Although Mann's words maintain that the education system is equal for everyone, this narrative seems like a myth. The broader social, political, and economic structural impediments make the goal of attaining universal education and social justice a distant one. This section will explore the current gaps in the Ontarian education system pertaining to Indigenous inclusion, resource allocation, student health aspects, among others. The first and foremost issue of the education system in Ontario, as well as Canada, pertains to the lack of Indigenous inclusion. The previous provincial government promised education curriculum revision, with respect to social studies, history, geography, and civics curricula, in 2016 to incorporate Indigenous perspectives, related to legacy of residential schools, among others. However, the current Ontario's Ministry of Education, on the pretext of cost-cutting, rolled back the project in 2018 that required revision of curriculum in response to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The residential schools in Canada systematically undermined Aboriginal language and culture across the country that led to transgenerational familial disruptions. The family separations resulted in many Indigenous students growing up without experiencing a nurturing family life and without the knowledge and skills to raise their own respective families. The devastating effects of the residential schools are far-reaching and continue to have significant impact on the Aboriginal communities in Canada. Further, this education policy reversal not only hindered the role of the ministry to establish respectful relationships via meaningful consultations with the Indigenous communities, but also impeded the ability of both Indigenous and non-Indigenous students and educators to understand their potential roles in the process of reconciliation. The second critical issue pertains to the recent provincial spending cuts on education and allied social services sector. In 2019, the governing Ontario Progressive Conservative Party announced major changes to the Ontario Student Assistance Program with aims to cut financial aid grants and access for college and university students across the province, leaving countless current, past, and future post-secondary students worried about their financial health, especially low-income and middle-income students. Furthermore, the funding gap between First Nations schools compared with other schools across the country averages around 30%. Thus, the funding cuts in Ontario will most likely lead to further exacerbation of the issue related to Indigenous inclusion, at both provincial level and national level. In addition to this, the funding crunch could lead to an adverse impact on Indigenous youth due to lower quality education, on a comparative basis. The third and one of the most burning issues in Ontario is the worsening problem of student health and wellness in universities and colleges. According to the Council of Ontario Universities, the number of students in college and university campuses with identified mental health disabilities has more than doubled over the past 5 years, with 3/4 of mental health disorders first appearing among people before the age of 25. This situation is bound to worsen with the Ontario government's policy shift, major education policy shifts and resource allocation changes, such as bigger class sizes, cuts in full-time teaching positions, among others. The cuts could further lead to excruciatingly long wait times for in-house student mental health counseling services as well. This issue is of urgent importance generally and specifically now considering the continuous adverse physical and mental health impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Contrariwise, the post-pandemic education ecosystem might require diverse solutions that demand an increased funding for enhanced infrastructure related to additional cleaning staff, regular cleaning of classrooms, wearing of face masks and recording and reporting of regular temperature checks for students and staff, among other health behavior changes that will probably form part of our lifestyles in the months and years to come. Essentially, the new normal will push us to practice out-of-the-box solutions that need to be funded adequately in the government education and health budgets. Additional health issues relate to hypertension and stress, academic stress, financial distress, external or relationship stress, and food-related stress, lack of physical activity, poor sleeping patterns, alcohol consumption, food insecurity, and poor nutrition. These factors are bound to exacerbate depression and anxiety levels across different levels and elements of society. Lastly, most mental health issues also have their roots in school bullying and youth violence. Bullying of any form, physical, verbal, indirect, sexual harassment, racial, religious, and electronic, can contribute to students feeling socially isolated. In addition, the psychological effects of bullying can very well last into adulthood and increase the likelihood of depression and various anxiety disorders. It is a fact that Canada was ranked a dismal 26th and 27th out of 35 countries on measures of bullying and victimization, respectively, in a recent international survey. Thus, Canadian school authorities, teachers, staff, parents, and legislation related to the Ontario Safe Schools Act needs to incorporate more stringent guidelines with zero tolerance, in terms of both regulatory framework and legislative implementation, towards bullying. Student mental health needs need to be treated as an urgent priority in Canada, sooner rather than later. Way forward, closing the education gap. Universal accessibility and affordability of education in Canada is not just an Indigenous issue or a post-secondary education concern. It is a societal issue with spillover effects ranging from healthcare, to the workplace, and the economy. The solutions to address the gaps in the education system in Ontario and in Canada requires a community-centrist and system-level approach that includes all levels of government and non-government sector, healthcare providers, post-secondary institutions, student associations and civil society organizations, including community agencies. Investments in education and in other determinants of health such as affordable housing, skilled jobs, and policies that reduce income and other socioeconomic disparities are as essential as overhauling curricula in schools. Teaching the children well does not transform the society alone. Besides basic knowledge, civic responsibility, moral values, economic self-sufficiency, cultural competency and social awareness are essential catalysts that could make education not only a great equalizer, but probably the greatest equalizer to attaining social justice, equity, and well-being, in the province and the nation. This article was originally published in Medium on June 17, 2020.